Hello and welcome back to Sustainability Natters with me, Elliot.
And Beth.
Today we're joined by Michael and Peter and we're talking all things climate resilience. Michael, Peter, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Right. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Michael, I'll come to you first.
Michael Winhall. I am Climate Resilience Manager for Defence Infrastructure Organisation. And I sit within the Technical Services team, which is a group of, quite a wide group of technical specialisms, and mine is climate resilience.
Okay. Yes, I'm Peter Egan. I'm the Head of Sustainability and Innovation at VINCI. And I run the utilities and the sustainability audit teams, as well as look at their wider projects and design.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. I must admit, climate resilience is something that I don't know a huge amount about. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. So let's start there. What is climate resilience?
Well, climate resilience is, it's all about assessing the risks posed by climate change and making sure we've got the mitigations and understanding what those risks are and mitigations in place to be able to continue our capability and output, regardless of what climate and the extreme weather events may occur. I would like to explain it's not about carbon. Climate change is clearly one of the biggest significant risks at the minute for humankind. And we've heard about kind of the 1.52 degrees mentioned at the Paris Climate Accord back in 2015. But we're already living in climate change world. Last year was 1.5. It's thought by NASA and Met Office that we're kind of 1.3 as the average so far. It may hit the 1.5 by 2030s. So we're living in a changed climate. Extreme weather is more frequent, more extreme, and we need to make sure we've got the resilience, how we work with our policies, our systems and procedures and our infrastructure, making those informed choices so that we can continue our output regardless of what gets thrown at us.
Yeah, and the only thing really I'd add to that is when we talk about net zero and carbon and all these things, what we're doing is we're looking towards the future and mitigating what's there. When we're talking about resilience, we're actually talking about today. What's happening to us now, and what do we need to put in place to be able to respond to what's happening in the world at this moment in time, and looking forward, understanding that it's a good chance it's going to get worse, and we need to be able to deal with that as we move forward. So, yeah, it's really dealing with the risks we all have to live with every day, which in the here and now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the carbon agenda is about reducing that carbon, that climate change in the future. We're already there. And we know it's going to get worse. We're locked into a certain amount, so it's understanding how and when to adapt, because that's now.
Yeah,
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you think sustainability, you always think carbon about a number of years in the future and what we're doing to support that. I certainly, Beth, I don't know about yourself, I don't really stop to think about, well, what are we doing now to cope with the changes that we're seeing? So what are we doing now? What are we doing now to understand kind of the impacts of today's climate on our infrastructure and defence estate?
Yeah, so for DIO, we excuse me, our team runs the CIRAM workshops. So that's Climate Impacts Risk Assessment Methodology, CIRAM.
Okay.
Useful little acronym there. That's a bespoke MOD system methodology for assessing the MOD's estate about what the risks are for climate. So we do a bit of a deep dive about what the establishment looks like. That's where we come in. We facilitate a workshop understanding what's the risk locally to the region, what does the climate projections look like, how the weather, the observed changes are already impacting you. And we use that to inform a workshop, a facilitated discussion, and tease out actually what are the operational issues, what would that mean to you if, this is what's happening now, this is where you flood, this is what goes on, it's going to get worse. Look through with a bit of a climate lens, and we create a risk register. And the CIRAM is very much a TLB-owned, establishment-owned process, but that's how we start to assess our risks at that local level. And obviously it escalates up from there and understand some of those bigger term risks. So that's how we do it. It's a climate impacts risk assessment methodology.
Yeah, and then we tie that into the wider estate planning piece, which is looking at estate management plans or the environmental management plans we have for each. In my terms of working in the facility management piece, we have that per contract, and we have a number of different contracts. So we have an estate management plan at contract level, and then each site level, there's an appendix which comes with that for each site, and we have a look at that. So what we can do is use the CIRAMs, that risk assessment, that site-specific data, and we then put that into the environmental management plans for that site, that region, and look at the key risks and how we can address them, but how we can address them in the here and now, and what things we need to look at in the estate management plans longer term to be able to reduce their impact, the impact the risk will have on us, and how we can either mitigate or adapt from them. But I think the one I like to look at is also look at the opportunities from them. So it's not all about what's the risk and how do we mitigate something. Sometimes there's huge opportunities identified in that, in changing our practices or creating operational capability or looking at things in a slightly different context than what we were looking at them before.
What sort of opportunities are there from this?
Well, one of the big ones we've got, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more, is water. Water becoming more and more scarce across the UK, and we're getting more and more water-intensive equipment and devices and systems across our estate. So some of the ways we can mitigate that, or the opportunities is how can we exploit the water we already have? Do we need to just put it back into the waste system? Or can we take the rainwater that comes off the roof, the rainwater that comes off the different parts of the sites, can we collect that and reuse it back in our infrastructure? Or can we target it to other parts of the estate where it creates or improves biodiversity? And one of the ones people always laugh at me when I say it is, if we actually embrace some of the natural solutions, we reduce some of the infrastructure costs. Because if you don't need subsurface water piping, so you don't have to need to dig up the site, you don't need to block off parts of the estate to get the new pipe work in, you don't need to buy the pipe work, you don't have to fill in afterwards, and you don't have to do all the things that come with putting drainage systems in.
Yeah.
If you can put a swale at the side of the building or put in a pond near the building or something, and all you do is put one bit of pipe work, comes from the roof, and then lets it go into a natural system, just think of all the work you've removed, all the costs you've removed, but you've built in all this resilience factors across the estate because that water's no longer now all getting channeled in a Victorian design method as fast as you can away from the buildings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where if you use a modern day approach, and you get the opportunities from nature, biodiversity, but also it just reduces all the infrastructure costs.
We have for decades found hard engineering solutions to this hard infrastructure, and that is not the right approach going. We need to be smarter with that. We need to be working with nature, like you say, these nature-based solutions, understanding how actually we can work with shading to stop overheating. We can start making sure we're using water as a resource. We need to be using it, capturing it, not just disposing it and getting, passing on problems further downstream. We've got a really great estate. Our trading estate, upland regions, peat restoration, all those kind of other sustainability themes, it all really meshes together about how we use of our estate, where we can kind of retain some of that water, reduce the flooding risk further downstream, how we use even our kind of our land-based establishments for retaining water on site, managing the flood rather than getting rid of it as fast as we can. And that's a crucial bit actually, that a lot of the resilience measures is understanding how we can work with that nature-based solutions, to come up with a two issues, kind of from a new build angle, building that in at early doors, and also kind of some simple retrofits kind of stuff within the establishment without having to go whole scale redevelopment of it, because that's not actually the best answer, not always the most cost effective answer either.
I love the use of nature to try and resolve some of these problems. I mean, you see it in the outside world, don't you? So on a new build development near where I live, they've built a beautiful pond in essence, but it's there to collect all the groundwater that's draining off. And from the nature side of things, the wildlife is really thriving there. So it's having a number of benefits. Are we doing things like that on the defence estate? Have we got good examples of where we've done that kind of thing and it's working well?
We are. It's an area in development, I would say. So one of the projects VINCI are looking at the moment in Bicester is we're looking to improve some of the biodiversity across the estate. So looking at the grass cutting policy. Right? Grass cutting actually creates a huge bio waste, which we have to store somewhere on site and we have to deal with. And actually most of our sites have 30 years worth of bio waste stored somewhere on the site for this grass cuttings and stuff put on there. So what we're trying to do is, one, looking at the cutting plan and then say, right, do we need to cut that bit of grass? Or do we only need to cut parts of it? Can we turn it into a meadow? Can we plant trees on it? Well, also looking at the flooding profile for the site and say, right, it floods in this area, the water comes down the hills through here. Well, if we put trees and we put in a couple of swales around that area, what that'll do is capture that water, it'll slow it down, it'll hold it, which allows it to soak away into the ground. It allows the sun to evaporate it into the air. The trees and the plants will drink it up and perpetuate it. So it allows us to do that. So that's one of the projects we're looking at the moment. And there's lots of these other projects going on across the state. A Landmark, another defence partner, are doing loads of work in that area as well. And we can go on to, I'm sure we will, and as the conversation goes on, but then it starts tying into other areas like neutrality and biodiversity credits, and where we can then emphasise these things we're doing to improve the biodiversity and the lived experience of the estate, because we all live around this estate and work around it, is where then it becomes an opportunity. Going back to the opportunities, is can we make make biodiversity credits? Can we build carbon credits? And we're going to stay away from the carbon conversation.
Carbon adaptation. Thank you.
But these different things then become an opportunity because you're improving the biodiversity of the estate.
And I guess you've got different opportunities depending on where on the defence estate you are. So if you know, the grass cutting example, I guess that's far easier on areas of the training estate, for example, than it is on an operational airbase next to a runway. Yeah. You know, and are we looking at, and I guess that's taken into account, isn't it, when we're looking at how we're managing these risks of what is achievable?
You can't do that in central London because there isn't any grass. But
you can get shading in other ways.
Yeah.
You know, so the urban heat island impact is quite significant. You know, but things like shading, tree planting, shrubs, that kind of stuff, keeping the heat off the hard tarmac, the concrete, where that heat is then retained during the evening, it doesn't cool down. That kind of issue is going to become more prevalent. And even things like cutting grass, and this is a bit of research, even a couple of inches extra grass reduces the temperature at ground level quite significantly, which is better obviously for the coal cooling thing. So little things like that will start having a big impact. So there are things we can do in urban centres too, and green roofs and stuff like that too, obviously all slowing down, adding to insulation, thermal, kind of insulation, not just heating, but also stopping the building overheating. You know, in those extreme summer temperatures we're going to be getting.
And of course, it looks great as well, doesn't it?
It does.
Who doesn't like a nice meadow next to you, to your buildings?
Well, exactly. We've spoken about kind of some of the opportunities and some of the positives that we can see. What about the other side of the coin, the risks? What are the risks facing defence if we are not investing, but if we're not putting our effort and our time into climate resilience?
The kind of the core risks of climate change for defence. So obviously the big ones is temperature, climate change, global warming. You know, temperatures increasing, so expect hotter summers, more extreme heat waves in the summers, prolonged summers, and warmer winters, but also wetter winters. So the precipitation, the rainfall annually is going to increase typically across the UK, and actually quite a lot. You know, increased in annual precipitation for the UK, but it's all shifted to the winter, and the summer's actually going to be significantly drier on average across the UK and a lot of our other overseas states as well. So it's understanding that interplay, you know, temperature, heat, overheating. Already in the last 10 years, the number of hot days, 28 plus, has doubled compared to long-term average, tripled for days over 30. So this is the trend. It's going to continue doing that. So how do we cool at night? How do you lose the heat out of the building on those long heat waves, extreme heat, because it's just too damn hot outside? How do you start shading those buildings? And these are management principles too, about awareness, close your curtains, close your blinds kind of thing, stop the midday sun getting in, but then understanding how you dump that heat at night.
And I'm a self-proclaimed geek, so I openly say I am a self-proclaimed geek. But what we're talking about is shortwave radiation. So we're talking about the way the sun rays come in. You get refraction where it hits the landscape, and you said about a bit of grass can refract it, the sunlight off, and that stops it absorbing into the ground. But when you have hard surfaces like roads, footpaths, car parking spaces, tiled roofs, all these, they absorb heat. Runways. They all absorb heat, they hold heat, and then they release heat, and they release the heat in the evening as it gets colder. So what that does is it raises the temperature in the summer all throughout the 24-hour periods. So when areas would naturally cool down, they don't. And our buildings don't cool down because the air next to them is still hot. So when you open the window to cool the room down, it doesn't cool down because you're just sucking in the warmer air from the outside, which has come from this shortwave radiation release. So can we design that out? Well, the answer is yes.
Yeah, we can.
And all the things what we were just mentioning there about putting trees down on buildings, above and below the canopy is a 20% difference in heat. So above the canopy, you'll have a 20% higher temperature than you will below the canopy, and that's a proven fact. Google it, a piece. And when we embed these things in the home estate, we can learn from them. So my past experience, I used to be in the military. I went out to South Sudan with the British military out to there to go and do some projects. And I was actually doing a master's in sustainability at the time. Sorry, I said I was a geek. But one of the things we learned from was working with our partners. So the British and the Americans, the big Western countries, don't think about natural shading and stuff on their estate when they deploy. They bring big generators in, put them in, and they do all our air conditioning. But if you want to work with our partner nations who don't have the same capital to invest on the estate, the first thing the Indian Army do when they know they're going to be there for more than a couple of weeks, they plant trees around all their footpaths. Really? Why? Because, and it's an old narrative, and if anyone knows their history, Napoleon planted trees all the way down the roads in France, and they're still there today. The reason why is armies march better in the shade than they do in the sun. So he planted all these trees all the way up and down France, so his armies could march in the shade. Well, that's what the Indian Army still do today, is they walk around in the shade in their camps. They put the trees, provide natural shade into the buildings. And when I was working with them and I asked them, hey, did you learn this? How did you do that? They said, you taught us in the 1800s.
Yeah. Forestry team's going to love you.
Yeah.
Really?
So we
forgot, but you carried on doing it.
So we've forgotten it. So when we're writing our practices today on the home estate is a really good way of learning how to do the operational estate better.
Yeah.
So we can bring in all these things. So you can bring in plantation sucks heat because of moisture. It releases moisture. The moisture sucks in the heat. So if you do a shortwave radiation works out to about 2 meters away from a building. So if you put plantation about 2 meters away from a building, which is a perfect distance for a swale, if you're going to put a swale in for your rainwater to go into, well, that'll pull heat away from the building. So in these hot summers, they will pull the heat away from the buildings, cooling them down. So that reduces, if we do need to put in aircon, or where do we need to put in ventilation on these pieces, it reduces that impact back on the home estate.
These are like your blue-green infrastructure kind of stuff. You know, it's got value, it's got purpose, and it's been tried, tested. You know, we just need to build it back into modern design thinking.
Again, it's that nature, isn't it, coming to help us. So, I mean, this is all incredibly fascinating in terms of different things that we can do to resolve it. And I guess there's a lot of different opinions and perspectives that need to come together to come up with this plan. So taking in kind of specialist engineering, operational understanding of what we need to deliver. How are we bringing all of those together to come up with that plan to tackle the problems of today?
Well, I think the CRM process identifies those risks and is really at establishment level, understanding what those risks are, how they may manifest themselves to operations capability, training, that live work experience. But then it needs to be integrated into design and delivery. So that's several different things. So a policy processy bit that some of that might be done at the establishment level. So agreeing a shift of work patterns. So why are we training in the middle of the day where it's hot? Let's bring that early forward. So we're not necessarily got the heat risk. That kind of approach. Equally, that might be cascaded up to TLB for a wider policy kind of change. Or it might be going, actually, we think we've got an issue here. We probably need to do some more monitoring of it because at this point, it's going to get a little bit more too severe. What's that risk appetite? A lot of that is about understanding the risk, balancing that against your risk appetite. At what point does it become too much of a threat? And the trick is at recognising that in advance so you can plan to do something, because that's a statement of need, business case behind it all to work up some investment. So that then feeds into our design disciplines about standards design, making sure we're working with our tech service providers about how we make sure that the design is resilient. And we don't want to add extra overs to stuff where it's unnecessary, but we do need to be thinking, where's that value sit? And are we buying this with our eyes open to understand the risk that we're buying and incorporating in? And that's a case of understanding the now, understanding the future. So things like making sure that the building's set at the right level for future resilience is something you can't retrofit. That has to be done early doors. But adding shades or shuttering to something, that could be a retrofit as long as the structure's able to do it. So you might want to cherry pick what you do now, but recognising there might be some work in the future that you need to go back and understanding that's a management plan for that establishment. And the final bit on that is then the establishment management plans. So really working with the CRM Intel and how we want to use that establishment going forward about actually this is when the right time to do this work is. So are we upgrading the sea defences because we know they're going to need to be upgraded at some point? Well, when's the opportune time to do that? And to not draw red lines around things. So we typically look at new development and go, this is red line, literally a red line boundary on a drawing. This is the site. This is development. We'll make that resilient. Well, does it work actually with the holistic view for that site? So this is where we need to think about what's the long-term plan? How are we using this site? What's the impact? And some crucial players for that process is,
you guys on site, the FM contractors, you've got wealth of experience, knowledge. Your teams have been there for donkeys, grown up with the site. They know how it operates. But also the likes of the local authorities, the Environment Agency. We've got a couple of sites now with a couple of our TLBs where we're engaging Devon County Council, Somerset County Council, and part of the CRM workshop. Thus, we need to understand how we work with our neighbours. We're a core stakeholder within our region to operate within. So we need to understand what the risks are regionally, what does the local authority and the emergency responders think of climate risks, how we feed into that, and how we work with them and understand, because we've got a role to play.
Yeah, and some of the key tools to help this is awareness and competence within the system. So training is a key part. But JSP 850 is the Bible for infrastructure for DIO. In there, he's writing these things we're talking about into. So General Andy talks about it being an evolving document, that it shouldn't be written and stay the same for 5 years. It needs to evolve. It bases some of the stuff in there, these building performance specifications, one of them which is specifically around climate change. It's more about energy use, but is BPS 0.1, and that's actually based on industry best practice. So as that industry best practice, it continues to improve. And if you look at some of the design standards for central London, they're all about embracing nature into the design standards. And you'd think a major capital city, but actually they're all about bringing nature and plantation and these different things in there. There's loads of different things we could talk forever about in there. He's making sure DIO actually, and he's incorporating them into the doctrine. And then because JSP 850 is a key resource people use when they write their statements of need, it needs to be written in a way that people who are not experts but writing a statement of requirement or a statement of need can go into it and pull these key parts out. So there's a couple of documents which dictate how projects are done. One is a statement of need or statement of requirement, depending on where in the business you are. They get a slightly different name. The secondary document comes out as a user requirement document, and in there is all the requirements for a project to have. Nature and these different things we're talking about should be written in there. So there shouldn't be, as we mentioned earlier on about a boiler, it shouldn't say replace a gas boiler with a gas boiler. It should say, I want to, we want a new heating system. It needs to include these different things in there. And they can be prioritised, but it allows then, as it comes through to people like myself, we can say, right, actually, this is your need. And we can take that holistic look. We can look at the CRM, we can look at the estate management plan. We can look forward and say, right, replacing a boiler for a boiler might be the cheapest option right now, but it's actually not the best option for this site. It's not going to be a long-term cheapest option. It's not going to build you in resilience. It's just it's a sticky plaster for the next 5 years till the boiler runs out. It needs replacing again. So it allows us to look at them. So the statement of requirement or the statement of need, which are on the user requirement documents, are really important. But because there's lots of people write them documents, they get used in lots of different TLBs and lots of different stakeholders, the core document lots of them they'll go back to is JSP 850. So that document needs to be written in a way that it guides people who are not experts in to be able to bring it in, so then the rest of the partnerships can engage. And when we're looking at the capital investments, the stuff like, what's the benefit of bringing nature and biodiversity and looking at these, shading and all these different parts in the building which wouldn't naturally fall into the business case? Well, we can help. One of the things we're looking at the moment actually is, can we create a tool which helps you cost all that, work out all the benefits, gives you a nice traffic light system which you can go into, look at it and say, actually, here's the benefits to it. So without, again, being a sustainability or resilience or nature expert, you can go in and say, why is that red? Why is it not green? Yeah. And then that can be cut and pasted into the business case. And so these are the sort of things we as partners can make for DIO, for TLBs, because it just makes our life easier, because it means you write the right requirements for us to be able to deliver what your aspiration is.
Yeah.
And we get standardisation, improvement, by over time. And you mentioned JSP 850. Within that, there's the SEAT handbook, Sustainable Investment Appraisal Toolkit. I hope I got that one right. But within there, there's a climate resilience bit and a climate resilience toolkit and some guidelines about what this means and where to go to. And hopefully your tech service providers and people understand a bit about climate. But that's not always the case, because it is a bit new. Our standards are still catching up with recognising that we're living in a climate change world and we need to be designing. So our new build stuff isn't always automatically suitable. We need to make sure we've considered it, and that's the critical bit, is making sure, as I said before, going in with the eyes open. What are we buying? What risk are we buying? And are we happy with that risk? Yeah. And it might be so. But actually we need to be aware of that and make the informed decision to go.
And it's making sure them tools are used at the right time. So one of the things in there is the sustainability appraisal. It's one of the first things you do in part of the sustainability cycle in a project. But a lot of times it's used too late.
Agreed.
So the best way to do, to write and let's just forget the word sustainability. Let's just forget nature and resilience and all that sort of piece for a second. The best solution for your project, the most efficient, the cost-effective, long-term value, which from any infrastructure project are the keywords in the defence world. To do that, you need to do it, make them decisions and write them requirements in the earliest you can. Later you write them in, more it costs you because you have to change things and go back. Right, so earlier you write them in, the better. So that's sustainability appraisal is a risk assessment. That's all it is. Again, a bit of like a traffic light system piece. So that needs to be done really early. So we have these things called the Aviva stages in infrastructure projects. If it's not done in Aviva stage 1, at the beginning of Aviva stage 1, you have missed your opportunity because we will design it out because it's too late and we've made the investment decision by that point. The first business case has gone in.
So you're closing yourself down to options that might make things, because those options start to get narrower the further you go through the route. I absolutely agree with that.
So you've lost the opportunities we're talking about. Them opportunities get identified from that risk assessment. But if you've already made your direction of travel by that point, and that opportunity no longer aligns to that direction of travel, you're going to negate it. And that happens a lot in projects. So we need to make sure they're being done early enough that they're directing the direction of travel, not becoming a tick box exercise we do as part of the process.
And is there an education piece there though too? So I'm sure it's written down in the processes there. Aviva stage 1, I think it was. You said you need to think about this, and I'm sure that's done. But is there an education piece there to get people kind of on board and understanding why it's so important that that's done there, so that perhaps more focus is put on?
I think there is, and I think I've worked in defence for a long time, and I've seen that process. I think originally was created about 15 years ago, because it came out of a European standard approach. But it's developed and it's got a lot better. I was going to say I went away from defence for a year when worked with another organisation. I came back, and in that time, that document and the suite of documents have changed the format they're in, and the new format is really good. They've all been combined together as one document that. I hate to say the word layman because it's not not what I really mean, but somebody who's not a technical expert in that area can go into the document and look through it. And what I'm trying to do now with VINCI is seeing where we can make that even easier for people who are working on our side of the business to actually say, right, what's the baseline defence, their aspiration, what's the top level thing? Well, let's just put that as the base requirement in. We say, right, that's the base requirement on every project, what comes our way. And as we go through the feasibility piece, we then say, is it actually viable? Can we do that? And we can do that risk approach back with the client, back with DIO and the TLBs and say, we can do this one, we can do this way. But it allows us then to, as I said, the direction of travel for the options we come out of the feasibility with, instead of being done at the end of the feasibility study. And then we've already decided the direction of travel and the opportunity has been lost. So we're looking at the moment, how can we make it even easier to engage in these tools, which are the business way of business, even easier for us to be able to, pick up them opportunities.
And you're right about the training. So there are training opportunities. So we've got, so for the major projects, we've got kind of training little modules about kind of how to build in climate resilience into the stages. We've got an environmental management team kind of supporting compliance teams within tech services to kind of support them, scrutinise that process, but also to kind of provide support and backing. But equally, part of the Serum workshop, going back to Serum again, and part of that is about awareness from an establishment level. Kind of, this is what climate change means to you folks. Eyes wide open. You need to go into this knowing what climate looks like. But as a team, we're also working with some of the TLBs in terms of getting climate resilience into kind of some training agendas. So Army Safety Centre, etc. To go. Cool. This is climate. This is what resilience means to you. Yeah. And in there, we really highlight the kind of some of the risks about. Where's your business continuity plan? Have you looked at your business continuity plan with that resilience lens again? Because if you haven't, how resilient is it actually? So when you have to deploy your continuity plan, if it's in the event of an extreme weather, is it going to stand up? How can you get out? How can you deploy? Yeah. So there's a lot of that kind of awareness too, which is really critical. Yeah. And that even ties back into kind of the be prepared kind of approach and even our own personal lives, understanding actually what are some of the risks that we're facing and how would we cope?
Yeah, and case studies and all that sort of articles. That's one of the things I'm just looking at the moment with VINCI is how can we show some of the success cases we've had and our partners for them to show their sort of
lessons learned.
Yeah, and we feed that back in so people can learn from that process. And more of this we do, more of these sort of things we do, create that conversation, that we can share that information, we can, and people become more aware. And I think we just need to get rid of some of the negativities. There's been certain words what have been bandied around too much. Net zero has been bandied around too much. It's sort of sustainability gets bandied around a lot without people actually understanding what they mean. And one of the things I actually try and do in conversations with TLBs is I just take them words out of the conversation. It's the same conversation, I just don't talk about them.
Yeah, it's not about carbon, it's about adaptation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is the thing, actually I talk about operational effect and de-risking the estate and the things what actually fit in the business side of the world. But it's the same conversation, I've just used a different vocabulary.
And ultimately that's why we're doing it, because we've got to maintain resilience, we've got to maintain capability with whatever that throws at us.
Yeah. And really quickly, obviously a lot of your work is dealing with the now, but also dealing for tomorrow, dealing for the future. Is there anything that makes you excited for the future?
So I think I've just probably stole my own sandwiches there. It's the conversation.
Yeah.
More conversation we have, more people will get involved, more people become aware. And that's how we change things. That's how we identify the opportunities. So doing the risk, looking at the risks is great, but it's the opportunities which will enable us to move forward.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of knowledge. We've got a lot of skill. We do this, but we're lucky. MOD's been doing this for Serum for a good while now, kind of nearly 20 years in places. So we've got some really detailed knowledge. We just need to continue applying it, learning from it, and building it in. Ultimately, we don't need a climate resilience team. It should just be integrated into our day jobs and our business.
BAU.
It should be BAU. It should be integrated in design. Should be built in our processes. So we're getting there. But there's still a lot more to do.
Hopefully one day we'll get to that point. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much. It's been incredibly fascinating and I've certainly learned some things from this today. So thank you. That's it for today. Thank you.